one of the main things that I try to focus on is the positive highlights, or just a highlight in my day every day. I always make sure to ask my colleagues that, what was the highlight in your day? And sometimes I'll even ask students that at 8:30 in the morning, as soon as I see them, just to get that positivity flowing through their mind. So first off, I'll introduce myself using the Anishinaabe language. So anin, bonjour kinawea, pidagish go gabe moetak Indigenous Alderville First Nation and Donjaba, Sturgeon Falls Nadoda, Wabjeji Dodem, Anishinaabe Ninyanda. So greetings, hello everybody. My traditional name is roughly translates to sounding thunderbird from the south. My English name is Jordan Mowat. I'm originally from a place called Alderville First Nation, which sits on Rice Lake. I currently live in Sturgeon Falls, and I'm of the Martin clan, and I'm Anishinaabe. So I just want to give my gratitude and my thanks for being able to participate and to have this opportunity to share my story of reconnection, of reconnecting to the culture. So first things first, right now what I currently do for a living is I'm what's called an Indigenous support worker with the Sudbury Catholic District School Board. I'm currently sitting in my room, and this is what we call the Indigenous support room. Personally, I like to offer my services to all students, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, mainly because there's a number of child and youth workers who can't really take on a lot of students at a time. So I try to extend my hand as well. So talking about reconnection, I think the main thing that we should try and think about is that, what does that really mean? What does connection even mean? What does culture mean? Culture can mean different things, and it can mean something in many different ways. It depends on how you look on it or look at it. To me, culture is just how you perceive life. If you're an Anishinaabe, there's many ways that you can live culturally, whether that be being out in the bush, going hunting and exercising your inherent rights, your treaty rights. Culture can be attending ceremony, or it can also even be attending powwows and round dances. It can be story writing, telling traditional stories. It could be harvesting wild rice. It can be all sorts of things. There's a word that we say called Minoba Madswood, which translates to live a good life. I try to live a good life as much as I can, or as best as I can. There's times where I kind of fall off and kind of end up with some struggles, but it all what matters is what I do and how I use culture to help me out of those ruts. Growing up in Alderville First Nation, I was always immersed by our Anishinaabe way of life. The one thing I should mention, though, is that my mom and dad never like pressured us into it, or never pushed us into the culture. They always just said that it's always going to be there for us when we're ready. And I think that's something that we should consider for our young children. I know that there's people or parents who wish to have their children involved in the culture as much as they can at a young age, but sometimes we got to let that child discover it for themselves. So when I was I went to Roseney Centennial Public School, and I can still remember the first day of school. I can still remember what I wore that day. I think it was a long sleeve shirt with jeans, and I had light up Darth Maul shoes. And I didn't necessarily understand what it meant to be Native or First Nations at that age, only 4 or 5 years old. But as I grew older, I started to see that who we are as a people. I realized that a lot of my non-native friends didn't do the same things that I did. They didn't have drums like we do. In our language, we refer to them as Mishomus Odewegan, or grandfather drum. Um, and so um, growing up, as I got older through public school, I was starting to kind of get that connection more and more to who we were, or to who we are as an Anishinaabe. Um, and that all started by singing on our grandfather drum. The very first time, I must have been at least about 5 or 6 years old, and I can remember my dad being part of a group called Burning Plains. Um, and the story behind that name, Burning Plains, comes from an old war story that he told me, and I'll try to reiterate it as best as I can. But we're the Mississauga Ojibways of Alderville First Nation, and long ago we had altercations or disagreements with the Haudenosaunee, or the Mohawk people, um, which at times resulted in war. And the story goes that when the Mississauga were coming down to the south on the offensive against the Mohawk, um, what we did when we arrived at Rice Lake was we lit the plains, the fields on fire, and the reflection of the flames reflected off of the lake, which made it look like the rice beds were on fire. Um, Hence the name Pemadash Gadeang, which translates to Lake of Burning Plains. So that's where that name comes from. And I can remember sitting around that drum, being that young, and I remember they started doing the drum beat, and nobody was singing it, so I just started singing. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just started going for it. And I remember they all laughed. And my dad told me when I was a baby that he brought me to the drum, and they were singing, and they were passing me around the drum. There's a reason why if you ever go to a powwow, you feel so connected to the drum, because the word that I said before, Ode Wegan, the way that it translates is Ode is the root word, which in Ojibwe means heart. Ode. Um, if I remember correctly, way is like the sound it makes, and gun is like an object. So Ode We Gun. And when we're about to make our grand entry into this world, after being carried by our mothers for 9 months of our life, what we're hearing all the time, 24/7, is her heartbeat, is our mother's heartbeat. And that's why when you hear that drum, why a lot of people are so connected, why they want to just go and see the drums all the time, or they want to try it out for themselves. And I don't have a drum here with me today, but um, we have something called the round dance beat, and that's what is said that it represents, that beat or that sound. Um, so as time went on, there was some difficulty in my life when it came to identifying as being Anishinaabe, or nowadays we say Indigenous. Um, and there were times where I faced racism, and I didn't necessarily understand what racism was until I started to experience it and how it made me feel. The issue that I had was I didn't know how to address it at that age, being in grade 6, 12 years old. But what I did know how to do was to walk proudly always. Um, my mom and dad, they I always saw them as people who kept their heads held high, no matter what no matter what obstacles were put in their way. They always kept moving forward. Oh, I apologize about that. Uh, I'm a popular guy. um, and so they always I can also remember, my dad being a historian, how proud he would be to tell me history of Alderville, or of my great grandfather Fred Simpson being an Olympic runner. He was always so proud. And my mother being proud to understand the language, or to speak Anishinaabe as best as she could, or as much as she could. She can understand him fluently, but I can remember growing up, being young, that she would say some things to us in the language, and to this day I can understand those things. Um, so things like that, being that young, I started to realize that we were pretty unique. That we're a pretty unique people to exist on Turtle Island, especially when it comes to our language. Um, our languages are very, very, very descriptive. It's totally different from what you would hear in French. Um, Maybe even if you hear other languages out there. But I know that for our words in general, that um, each word to me kind of tells a story. So like, just like how I explained what Odewagan means, I broke down each part of that word. Um, and I think that's what makes our language so unique. Um, the word for blueberry, I can't say it, but it's a very long word. But what I do know is that the word itself is actually talking about uh, kneading the dough, to making the jam, to getting those berries, to putting it inside the crust, and to finally making the blueberry pie itself. And that's how descriptive our language can be. Um, so by the time that I was in grade six, um, we got a youth drum going again in Alderville First Nation, and that's when I was introduced to Bruce Smoke and his son Nolan, and then the his family group, the Smoke Trail Singers, and he taught us every week, and I started to really connect with the drum after that, being only 12 years old, and um, I always was able to kind of have rhythm because I was a drummer as well. I played the drums, and so the rhythm part came pretty easily. The singing came afterwards, and it started off as humming for me, and then eventually I started singing confidently. And then being so dedicated to it, eventually it led me to become the drum keeper of our youth drum, and that was a big responsibility. And I remember Bruce telling me, that sharing some teachings about what it takes to be a drum keeper, and he said, you got to take care of the drum. You got to make sure that when you're not using it, that you wrap it back up in its blanket. Um, Speak to it every once in a while, and just take care of that drum because it will take care of you. And so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna do the best job that I can. And I can remember one morning getting ready for school. I was about to leave, and I sat on my bed and I started talking to the drum. And as I was about to go and catch my bus, I said, "Okay, drum. Well, I have to go to school now, but I'll see you when I get home." And my mom and dad, I guess they were listening in on me, and they had a good laugh. And but they were always proud of me that I really took it that serious. Um, so our drum group, we called ourselves the Sugar Island Singers. So there's an island that we have on Alderville, or on Rice Lake, called Sugar Island, where our people used to go a long time ago, and there's still some old pottery that you can find over there. That's what my dad tells me, and I haven't been there yet, but I'd like to take a trip there to really see and to feel that historical connection. Um, so when I was throughout public school too, I was bullied extensively. I was bullied every single day for 7 years, and to this day, I don't really know why. And sometimes I question it. Why was I bullied so much, and why did it happen so often? And then was it because I was Native? I don't know. Was it because I was athletic? No idea. Was it because I was musically inclined? Maybe. But for all these things, what happened to me was that it really brought down my self-esteem to the point where I didn't want to go to school. I wasn't looking forward to it. And because I'd be met with my bullies every morning. It would start every morning and go until the bell rang to go home. The mistake that I made was I never told anybody about it because I thought I was going to be able to handle it myself. And I paid the price. Paid the price for 7 years. Um, but there was one day where I did stick up for myself. I had a negative reaction. Um, and sometimes that's what can happen. It can lead to that. And that's why we have to be careful with how we approach people sometimes. Um, I try not to judge anybody because I don't know anyone's story. We all have a story. We all come from some place. That's why it's important that we treat everyone with respect, um, because we don't know what somebody's going through. And the reason I say that is that to treat everyone with respect is because one day you might meet somebody who needs that, and you could be that positive change for an individual or many others out there. Um, by the time high school came around, that was a different transition for me. Um, I was the only one from my reserve that was a freshman going into grade 9, and all my other friends from Alderville, they either went to Coburg West or St. Mary's. Um, so I went to Coburg East, and I can still remember the first day being the only, feeling like I was the only Indigenous kid in grade 9. Then I ended up meeting a couple more, which was awesome. Um, but I never kept to myself. I think that's what made me so lucky, um, because where Alderville is situated, we're situated along Highway 45, and we're also close to Toronto. So a place like Alderville, a lot of the people there, we've had a lot of opportunities to explore this world or to explore Southern Ontario, um, and to see many different cultures. So I was always aware that there was other cultures out there. Um, I think that's what also helped me kind of stay in high school and to keep pursuing, to keep striving to succeed. Whereas the difference with say Indigenous kids that come from places like Fort Albany or Saskatchewan or Attawapiskat, Moose Factory, even those remote communities, those kids are going to school with the same people for 12 years, depending on if they have a high school on their community, and then it's time for them to go to college. And a lot of them struggle when it's time to leave home because they have to go and travel far, and sometimes they're going alone. So you can imagine being somebody who's went to school with your cousins or your brothers and sisters, graduated with your cousins and brothers and sisters. Now you got to go to college where you're going to know absolutely nobody, unless you're lucky and you have aunties or uncles that you can live with. But there's some who end up going to and coming to places like here, like Sudbury or North Bay or Thunder Bay or whatever, and they go to school, and sometimes they can't handle being alone, and that's the unfortunate thing. And that's why it's important that we have to have these safe spaces like an Indigenous support room. Um, with reflecting back on high school, I struggled a lot academically. Um, and it was because I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't want to look stupid. I didn't want to look dumb. So I just I struggled through a lot of my work to the point where I can remember grade 9, my first year. My mom and dad, they put me in academic classes, and I knew I wasn't going to do good. Um, but if I had applied myself more, maybe I would have. I was just too lazy at doing the work. Um, I failed grade 9 English. I failed grade 9 science. I failed grade 9 math. And then I had to retake those the next year in grade 10. And then I had to catch up with my grade 10 work the next semester, in which I failed those. So by the time I got to grade 11, I had to repeat the grade 10 work and then catch up with grade 11. And then I failed those. So when I got into grade 12, I had to repeat grade 11 work, catch up with grade 12. Thankfully, I was successful by that time. But by the time graduation came around, I got the invitation. I can remember feeling proud. I was going to graduate with my friends, and then I went to graduation with my mother. My father was out of town, and I went up, and they said, "Your name's not on the list." And I can remember feeling very embarrassed, and I was really disappointed, and I got upset. I remember I addressed them, and I said, "You know how embarrassing this is. I'm here with my mother, and you guys couldn't have told me before that I wasn't going to graduate." So I had to repeat another year of high school, which, mind you, I didn't really mind doing. I wasn't ready to go to post-secondary. But I was just missing one credit, and that credit was grade 9 geography. And my dad, being my dad and being the historian, he ended up putting me in grade 10 history in grade 9. So thank you, Dad. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so I did a victory lap, and I did as best as I could again. And it was funny because if I remember, I think Native Studies class was initiated or implemented within our curriculum when I was in grade 11, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I could be mistaken. Maybe, look, I'm still referring to him as Mr. Smith. Maybe he could elaborate on that. But that was, so yeah. Was that, am I correct?
That's a good question, Jordan. I am going to guess, yeah, grade 10 or 11, I think.
Yeah.
That's when we were in class together.
Yeah, that's right. So so it's funny I mentioned that because as I was choosing my classes for my victory lap, I can remember sitting with the guidance counselor, and she had said, "So because you're going to be 18 years old, it doesn't really make sense for you to take a grade 9 geography class. So we're going to let you choose any class you want out of these three." And I think the three was one was horticulture, I believe. Another one was uh, I think another maybe science or something. And then she mentioned Native Studies, and I was like, I'm going to take Native Studies. And so ended up in Native Studies class again with Mr. Smith, and we had a grand old time. Um, but that was when it comes to that Native Studies class. Um, I can remember feeling a sense of like, this is what it's all about for me. How come we couldn't have this sooner, you know? And we're going back to 2010, 2011, where it was finally in our high school. Um, Throughout public school, I didn't hear anything too often about the residential school system. Um, I had no idea what that was. I had a little bit of an idea because my mom and dad, they would share about it, but I didn't actually understand the extent of it until Native Studies class. And Mr. Smith, he would talk about it, brush up on that, and um, so with that, with learning about the residential school system within Canada, our own country, that's really what kind of helped me really stay connected and to reconnect to a lot of other things um, involving our Indigenous culture, our Indigenous way of life. Um, So I'm 26 years old now. I have two beautiful children with my partner, Natalie, and we as parents we try to use the language as much as we can to our children. If there's ever a chance that we get to walk through the bush, if there's a traditional plant and I know its name in Ojibwe, that's how I'll introduce it to our kids. Um, I heard growing up too that if and when our children are born and we name them in our traditional languages, they'll always have that connection to the language. So when our son was born 3 years ago, in his first year of his life, we got his name, got his traditional name, and he's always going to have that connection now to the language and what that name means. He carries two names. We're going to do the same with our daughter, and culturally we try to keep them involved as much as we can. But the thing that we don't do is we don't force it on them. And I don't like to use like to make that sound bad, but um, you know, coming into or working in a Catholic school board, it's pretty interesting. Um, you know, some of you may be aware of the Catholic school boards, and you know, with Indigenous people, referring to the residential school system and what may have been implemented within these schools. But now that we have workers like Indigenous support workers like myself, I like to personally look at it as decolonizing one class at a time, in a good way, of course. Um, and that's something that I mentioned is that for myself personally, I try not to force our culture onto our children, even though I want them to be connected, but they have all their life to choose that, just like how I did, just like how my parents let me. So I'm going to share a story with you guys real quick. And this story is called, it's probably going to be weird looking, but this story is called The Boy Who Walked Backwards. And it's a moving story about a young Ojibwe boy named Leo and his family in Serpent River First Nation. Leo's life turns to darkness when forced to attend residential school. Back home for Christmas, Leo uses inspiration from an Ojibwe childhood game to deal with his struggles. And when I first read this story, I absolutely bawled my eyes out. And sometimes I still kind of do. But so I'm going to get started, and I'll tell you guys why this story impacts me so much after I'm done. So, The Boy Who Walked Backwards, written by Ben Schurz and illustrated by Nicole Marie Burton. Okay, here we go. Leo was an Ojibwe boy from Serpent River First Nation in northern Ontario. He lived there with his mom, dad, and little brother. Leo lived a traditional Ojibwe life with home-cooked meals, splishy-splashy bath once a week, and bedtime stories that made him dream of adventure. Behind Leo's house was a tall, dense forest, and he and his friends spent a lot of time there, and they played all kinds of games. One of his favorites was Nagi Gazo, or what some people call hide and seek. Leo and his friends played Nagi Gazo in the forest among the black spruce and birch trees. Leo was very good at playing Nagi Gazo. He could stand perfectly still. His friends would run past him and not even know he was there until he jumped out and said, "Boo!" One day, strangers came to Serpent River. They had squawky voices that sounded like unhappy magpies. The strangers read from scrolls of paper, We have come to collect all the Ojibwe children so they may become educated. Leo and his friends were loaded into the back of a rickety old cattle truck. They were brought to a school run by nuns, covered from head to toe in black and white clothing. The nuns did things that made Leo and the other children feel very uncomfortable, like cutting their long black hair short, where their ears stuck out, and when the wind blew, the backs of their necks tickled. The nuns made the children sit at wooden desks in a stuffy room and speak in a language they weren't used to. It made their tongues sore and their jaws ache, and they began to feel sad and homesick. To feel better, Leo and his friends huddled in a circle and whispered in Ojibwe when the nuns weren't watching. They talked about their families, their beds at home, and playing Nagi Gazo in the forest, and this made them giggle quietly. One day, the nuns announced all the children would go home for Christmas. They told the children that Christmas is the birthday of the baby Jesus. As a man, Jesus was so special, he could keep his long dark hair. Leo was happy about Christmas because it meant he was going home to see his family, and he missed them a lot. The nuns brought Leo and the other children back to their families. At home, they ate good food, spoke in Ojibwe, and played in the forest among the tall trees. Leo decided he wanted to stay home after Christmas. He didn't want to return to the school, but he needed a plan. The Christmas holiday went by quickly. Soon there was only one day left before the children would be collected. They decided to have one last game of Nagi Gazo in the forest, and it was Leo's turn to hide, and he stood very still behind a tree and stayed silent. Where one of Leo's friends walked right past him, and their footsteps made loud crunching noises in the snow. Leo stared at the footprints, and they gave him an idea. The sky began to darken and snow started to fall. Leo and the other children headed home for one last good meal with their families, and the snow fell until morning. The next day, Leo got up very early. He didn't want to wake his family, so he quietly put on his moccasins, his mitts, and his jacket, and then he stepped outside, where Leo turned to face the house and started walking backwards through the freshly fallen snow. He walked all the way to the tree line and continued deep into the forest. And just like when he played Nagi Gazo, Leo waited silently and stayed still. Eventually, he heard that cattle truck arrive at his family's house. He could hear the voices of his friends in the back of the truck. Then he heard a magpie-like voice squawking out his name. Leo Day! Where is Leo Day? The truck driver walked around the yard looking for some sign of the boy, but all he could find were tracks in the snow that looked like they came out of the forest. The driver pointed at the tracks and said to the nun, "There's no sign of the boy, just these tracks coming out of the forest. He can't be in there." Leo's parents shrugged their shoulders and made question-mark faces. The nun's face turned red and she let out a frustrated and grumpy-sounding harumph. The people from the truck glanced around the yard one last time and then drove away. Once the sound of the cattle truck had faded in the distance, Leo let out a huge sigh. And he ran out of the forest and up the steps and into the arms of his surprised mother and father, who gave him a big happy hug. They brought him inside, wrapped him in a blanket, and gave him a cup of tea so he could warm up. And Leo smiled. Leo grew up to have many children. He learned to play the fiddle. He became a respected elder and counselor in Serpent River First Nation. And he always got a sore tongue and an achy jaw whenever he had to speak English. And that's The Boy Who Walked Backwards Through the Snow. So that story, when I first read it, it made me very emotional. I couldn't even finish it. I shed some tears. And the reason being is because that boy who walked backwards through the snow is my grandfather. And that was a true story. That's a true story. And he attended the St. Peter Claver Residential School in Spanish, Ontario. That was the school for the boys. And then the girls' school was across. So there was a boys' residence and a girls' residence. The one for the girls is still standing today. You could drive to Spanish, Ontario, and all you got to do is just turn left on the train tracks, past the train tracks, and head towards the marina, I guess, and you'll see that school on the left side of the road. So I wasn't aware that my grandfather Leo attended that till my mom told me, and he died. He lost his life to cancer. I believe it was 2002. But there's also a song. That's also a song called "The Boy Who Walked Backwards Through the Snow," also written and performed by Ben. And even that song, hearing that song, it makes me emotional as well. But I'm proud. I'm proud of that. There's ways that we can celebrate our people, and there's ways that we can celebrate ourselves as people. And one of these ways is by with their consent, of course, by sharing their stories. When my grandfather was on his deathbed, we spent the last he had two more weeks left to live, and every time we went to go see him, or every time my mother went to go see him, he always asked her, "Has the moose crossed the river yet?" She said, "No, not today, Dad." And finally, on that last day, he asked my mom, and my mom said, "Yeah, I think the moose is crossing the river today, Dad." And he ended up passing away. So even though there was a little bit of darkness in his life, it kind of just goes to show that there's still that little bit of light. And the way that he created that light was by turning to music. He was an amazing fiddle player, and he helped his people by becoming a counselor. And I've heard nothing but good things about him anytime I get to visit Serpent River. So that's the book. It's available. You can get it at the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center. They have a website. I'm sure if you look it up as well in Google, "The Boy Who Walked Backwards," I'm sure there would be a website link there. But even though I was young when he passed away, to me, this is still something that I have to stay connected with him. And last Christmas, my parents ended up getting me a fiddle for Christmas, so that's another way that I can kind of always be connected and honor him in that way. So it's stories like this, with my own family members attending residential school, that gives me that extra push to always be connected. And it's never too late to reconnect. A lot of people, think that because they're 40 or 50 years old that there's no time, but there's always time. There's always time. That's why Creator put us here. That's why we're here. In this life, it's a continuous learning journey. I don't know everything, but I'm always willing to learn, and I'm learning new things every day. Who I am as an individual, but more importantly, who I am as an Anishinaabe. And I'm sure Mr. Smith can even reflect when I say that too, that there's always time to reconnect and to even put yourself in the situation of being culturally aware. And as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Smith, you are reconnecting. Am I right?
I am, Jordan, always, constantly, but and that's my own story, which you know a lot of already.
Yeah.
I am gonna ask you though, Jordan, to stop calling me Mr.
I
Smith.
can't. I know it's just such a, I don't know, 26 years old. I'm still doing that, eh?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Jordan, Chimigwech, for your honesty and your bravery and sharing so much with a group that you don't know, and because of the times we're in that you can't even really see, which is a necessity. I hope you don't mind, but I lit a smudge for you.
Okay, perfect.
During the powerful parts of your story for both of us, and I've been holding your sema in my left hand the whole time as well. And with your permission, I'd like to open up the chat room.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
But and then just to follow up with what you're saying about the learning, it's constant.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of us as First Nations people, but certainly as Indigenous people, we recognize that the learning happens all the time. Doesn't matter if you get a degree or a certificate or whatever your position is. Learning has to happen learning can happen when you put ego out of the way.
Yep.
And that takes bravery. That takes honesty.
Yeah, I agree.
And you've been exemplifying that, with talking about how academic school isn't for everyone. And it's a very limited way of assessing someone's intelligence and their gifts. So, and look at you, you're back in the school system.
Back in the school system. And, I did attend college eventually. And it's funny because I went to school for police foundations. I wanted to be a police officer. Now I'm an Indigenous support worker in the education system. And what's funny is that I always wanted to continue to work with Indigenous youth, whether if it was being a police officer, but eventually it led me to here. And now I'm spreading my wings even more and moving to another school in North Bay to be an Indigenous graduation coach. So all these, you sometimes you just take a leap of faith and you apply yourself, you keep striving, and you'd be amazed at how many opportunities can be presented to you.
But you're also walking the path where, in trying to be a good human being, and we know what that means. That it doesn't matter your cultural background, it doesn't matter your heritage, but when you recognize all of our relations and other human beings and how connected we are, that's what is going to draw other youth to you to seek that guidance, and when they're patient and listening to your story, to learn from what you've gone through. Having role models is so important.
Yep.
In our communities. And it's not about being rich. It's not about having the big house or the big cars. That's the easy go-to. I just hope with the youth that you're working with that well, I know that they do, but I hope they continue to recognize what they can learn from you.
Yeah. So it's getting difficult for me to leave, but they're understanding, and I just keep on telling them that they have a lot of potential, and that maybe it could be them who'll be sitting in this seat someday.
While the students and teachers are getting ready to put questions down, because I know some of them are just who wants to ask what, and then they're going to be typing it down. Because I love connections, and I told you at the beginning, Missy was speaking yesterday, and as part of one of the underlying themes with our speakers is empowerment of youth and resiliency. If you could talk about the role that music has had in your life, especially with the challenges that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah.
I know you were a wicked martial artist or mixed martial artist.
Yeah, at one point.
Get into that after, but I'd really like to invite you to speak some more about how important music is in your life.
Okay, yeah. So it's always immersed with the music too. Like my dad is a blues musician. He's been playing for well over 30 years now. My mother, she sings, and my very first performance, I must have been only this was probably 20 years ago, and it was in Campbellford at their at their park that they have there in a gazebo. And I remember my dad was doing like a solo number, and I just slowly was creeping up to the drum kit, and then I can remember looking over at his band buddies, and they were like encouraging me. They're like, "Go ahead, go on, start playing." And so I got on and I started playing with my dad, and then the song ended, and I can remember he goes, "Everybody, my boy Jordan," and everyone just stood up and gave me a standing ovation. And I knew at that age, I was like, wow, like this is what I want to do. I want to be like my dad. And so as that's when I ended up getting a drum kit later that year, I believe, for Christmas. Played the drums for about 8 years, and then I got into high school, and then I started playing the guitar, and I started taking vocal class. And then I guess by the time I was 17, I was attempting to write my own music, but I didn't really understand how to. I kind of just wrote things, and it didn't even make sense. But then it wasn't even up until maybe a couple years ago where I started really understanding how to write music just by listening to other musicians. And kind of just sometimes I like to read lyrics just to see how they write. So now, music to me has always been a coping mechanism, a positive one, and it allows me to express myself in a confident way, or in a way that I'm most comfortable with. And it's gotten to the point now where, like, any song that I write, I don't need any validation from anybody, if it's going to be good or if it's going to be bad. What's important is that it's just like if you're, any artists who create an art piece, they create it and they look back at it and they feel rewarded that they finished it. To me, that's the same when I write a song and when I record a song and when I release it. Like I feel this sense of reward. So music to me, it's so important to me, and I don't know who or where I would be without it if I didn't have that gift of being able to play the guitar or being able to sing. So I'm just really thankful for music. It's helped me a lot.
Well, I know you've been a local celebrity for a long time, Jordan, and you're being very modest.
Yeah.
But and with your own original music,
Yeah.
and your solo drumming that you do as well.
Yeah. So I've been doing that on YouTube for the past 6 years now, and we're almost at 20,000 subscribers, man, and it's that's very rewarding for that people from all over the world can connect with that. And that's what it's all about for me, is I'm just expressing who I am as an Indigenous person and sharing that music. Oh, we got one here. Jordish Moish 123. Yeah, I think that is it. I think that's what I started it out as, but I'm kind of afraid to. How many do you see the 20,000 subscribers on there, or 19.6? I just want to make sure. But if you search up my name, just Jordan Mowat. Okay, yeah. If you search up my name, Jordan Mowat, I should pop up. I appreciate any of the support that I can get. And yeah, we've been at that. I try to create content, and eventually I'm going to start vlogging and letting people in and my personal life and whatnot.
That is it's inspiring gets used a little too much, right? But you're doing the walk, and that's what I like coming back to. And you're singing the song. And along those lines, Jordan, when you're with your role as an Indigenous support worker, which, you know, is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because you're not a support worker because you're Indigenous. You are a support worker who is Indigenous, working with Indigenous youth
Yeah.
as well. And, you know, you touched on your own personal family story with your grandpa Leo with residential schools. Part of your work would be healing, and part of an intergenerational trauma and ongoing systemic racism that you've spoken to as well, and you are seeing it daily with the youth that you're working with.
Yep.
How do you approach healing with the youth? Do you use music? I know you've got a wicked sense of humor that you know you're holding back on because of the presentation, but all those, what gifts do you bring in your role as part of the healing and supporting the Indigenous youth that you encounter?
That's a really good question. I do like to use humor a lot. To me, laughter is medicine. There's that saying, and I've always kind of lived by that. And you know, any student that comes in here to see me, depending on how they talk with me, I'll talk with them the same way. You know, I'm professionally unprofessional, if that makes any sense. And but it's helped me gain a good rapport with a lot of the students here, because I'm treating them like a friend pretty well. It's not an Indigenous support worker to a student relationship. It's me, Jordan. They call me Jordan, and they always know that they can just talk freely to me. I'm not going to judge them, and but humor is a huge thing that I try to incorporate, and you know, I like to think that it's successful a lot of the time, but yeah. Sometimes I'll incorporate the drum, or I'll share some teachings that I carry, or even other teachings that I've heard, and I'll try to incorporate that if I'm working one-on-one.
So along those lines, Jordan, I'm going to ask. I'm going to put you on the spot because I have you here, and you've been calling me Mr. Smith all morning. So here's the payback. And it might be a little bit of putting you on the spot, but I think it's the front of your mind as well. Here's an opportunity for you to speak to students directly and to teachers directly. And if there's, you know, as speaking to resiliency and supporting youth, not just Indigenous youth, but, you know, in the work that we do, we often say what is good for Indigenous youth is good for everyone, but the vice versa is not always true. And so what would you like to say, either to students separately and to teachers separately, two different messages on how do we go about supporting each other that is going to be helpful to everyone?
That's a really good question. I know the difficulty that is faced, and I don't want to like make anyone feel bad, because you know sometimes it's out of their control, but you know there is the challenge of having non-Indigenous people carrying the role, or carrying the Indigenous portfolio, or there's non-Indigenous folks who are teaching you know, courses like Native Studies, and you know that's not in their hands. Sometimes they're put in there, they're forced into it, but they do it. You know, they have to do it, and I know it makes them feel uncomfortable. So I guess for the teachers, if you have, if you know of you know, any of your colleagues who are Indigenous, and Dean, you're still the what's your role again with the
So I am one of the Indigenous education consultants.
Great. So for the teachers, reach out to Dean any chance you have if you have any questions when it comes to our Indigenous courses.
And we have Marjolaine, we have Melody as well.
Perfect.
So,
Yeah. So you have those people, you have those resources there. And when it comes to our Indigenous students, listen to them, you know, hear from them what they want to see. Because it sometimes it's not just about what I want to see here. Because what I want to see is going to be totally different from what my students want to see happening in the school. So it's important that we listen to their voices and let the youth lead, you know. That's the way I look at it.
Well, my young brother, every time I can spend time with you, I'm the better for it.
Mm.
And I'm quite certain that everyone that was lucky enough to be at our session today feels the same. And when we get this uploaded, with your permission, you know, your voice, your message, your story is going to play an important role in people's lives that are watching that. So Chimigwech, 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 Jordan, Willellen, in my language. And you take care of yourself and your beautiful young family as well. Keep them safe.
Yeah. To you as well, Dean. And again, I appreciate the opportunity. It's always great to hear and see to see you. And we'll stay in touch.
We will. And I'm going to say Chimigwech Willaliuk to everyone that joined us today as well. I continue to be deeply appreciative of the respect that the students from KPR are showing our guests coming into this new time. So it's kind of the virtual fireside chat. And Jordan, we were so lucky to have you. So take care.
That's awesome. Okay. Thank you guys very much.
Pamapi.
Pamapi. Guaman.